Um, just a couple more questions, 'cause I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to thank you again for joining us, fighting
Oh,
through
sure. It's fun.
the cough. So I saw you like to quote Le Guin on your site, and I'm a huge Le Guin fan. So I was just wondering if you've got some other fantasy writers that you like, specifically if you've got science fiction criticism that you like. I'm always looking to read new things. So
I don't read a lot of science fiction criticism. Le Guin is great. She has written a book called The Wave of the Mind that is just, I think that's the right title. That is just her thoughts on science fiction. The Language of the Night is another one. Some of the essays on the language of the night are sort of dated,
mm,
but she was brilliant. She also, if you happen to be a writer, she wrote a book called Steering the Craft, which is actually a workbook for writers, and it's really aimed at beginning writers. I got the book, and I never really did the workbook part, but just her insights, her few pages of insights in that thing are definitely worth it. Um, there's there's a website called Blackgate Magazine that has a lot of reviews, and they've published some serious criticisms of science fiction as well, I believe. Um, those are good. Um, as far as science fiction, or as far as fantasy, um, if you can do it, read a few of the old Ballantine books. You can look up Ballantine books, Sign of the Unicorn, and find some of the older stuff.
yeah,
Um,
that series is going next on my reading list. So
yeah, some of it you'll enjoy. Some of it, there's a few in there that it's like I just can't read them again. But there's people like Lord Dunsany, who
yeah,
was
I read the Elfland, right? Is
his
that
short
Dunsany?
stories are much better than his novels, in my opinion.
Okay.
Uh, I also have a list. I guess I should mention this. I'm a list on my website of what I consider the 100 best fantasy novels. A lot of them tend to be older, mainly because I consider a fantasy novel um, one that presents something new. And so a lot of the fantasy you read now is pretty derivative. And so there's things that most people would put on there, the Harry Potter books or the whatever. Um, but Ursula Le Guin was working with the School for Wizards back, not to say anything against the Harry Potter books, because they're well written for sure. Um, but just for unique fantasy novels, it's on my website. So
Yeah, I think I've seen that the top list. So
mhm,
another
yeah.
thing for me to check out. Um, I've been talking with my students quite a bit about the definition of science fiction versus the definition of fantasy, and you seem like someone who's well positioned right there, sort of that pivot point. Um, do you see the Nightland more as a science fiction story, or is it more of a fantasy story? Like, where do you land, or is it uncategorized? You're like, no, we have to throw off those categories for this book. Like, what do you think?
you know, the whole idea of categories between those two. I mean, let's face it, most of the science fiction, I mean, in science fiction, we have to assume a lot of times we're out in space that we can travel faster than light.
Mhm.
Well, so far
Yeah,
we can't.
yeah,
Uh,
and you go
do
back
we
in
call that?
time, right? When you travel, and so the physicists,
mm,
yeah, aren't happy with that.
yeah. So do we call that science fiction? Well, yeah, we do if it seems like it could possibly happen. Um, if it can't possibly happen, then we say, well, that's more fantasy. Um, could the sun really go out and people still live in a crater 100 miles deep? I think you're going to run into some things if you go 100 miles, for one thing. I'm not sure. I'm no
Yeah.
geologist, but you know, uh, I mean, this was written at the same time as Journey to the Center of the Earth, so or around that time. Um, so I don't know. It's a little bit of both. To me, I mean, there's obviously fantasy involved in the thing. Um, you know, um, but there is a core of science fiction is there. I mean, he at least tried to justify the things that he was coming up with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm gonna agree because in the beginning it's very science fictional, right? When
Mhm.
we're getting descriptions of the pyramid, right? We're getting descriptions of history. I mean, all that I felt was very science fictional. But then when we get out into the Nightland, it really becomes kind of like an adventure story, right? that is both fantasy and science fiction, but kind of more fantasy, right? So,
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, great. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we kind of start wrapping things up here? Anything else about the Nightland?
I will mention two things. The one was that there was another scene that I added, just for your information. The scene where when the youths leave the pyramid and they go into the House of Silence. I thought we needed some kind of scene to show kind of what happened to them. It's not in the original, but they appear back in front of the pyramid, beckoning people to come out. I added that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I just thought it was necessary. I think one guy on Amazon said I shouldn't have done it, but what can you say? The other thing that I added that I thought was important, the whole Romantic era is terrific, and we still see it in our movies. The guy and the girl, they get together, and they live happily ever after. But I really wanted to say something along the line of what it's really like to be in love. And so there's a brief paragraph in there that I added about the fact that love is not just an emotion. The love is an act. It's a decision that you make that you're going to love this person no matter what happens. And I thought that was worth saying in the connotation of the story. And I was very pleased that some Amazon reviewer quoted that part of the book. And so that made me very, very happy. On a more humorous note, when I read the original, there's a scene there, and this is one of the reasons that Ballantine Books cut some of the extraneous stuff on the Nightland. There is a scene there where, now remember, there's no dialogue here in the original, that Nani becomes naughty and willful. Naughty and willful are the words that he used. And so Andros takes her over his knee and spanks her. And
Heinlein would have approved.
Yeah, probably. But I read that and I thought, I wonder if that was considered sexual back when he wrote it, because it's nothing but embarrassing now, And so Ballantine Books chose not to put that in there. I likewise thought, no, that's not going to work.
There's some things, I don't know what William, if people called him Will or something, but if I had been in Will's writers group, I would have said, Will, do we really need this scene? Has this scene really added anything to the story? Right. Yeah. And there, people do. I just know this, if you know Algernon Charles Swinburne, right, who is a poet, who there was kind of freaky stuff happening behind the scenes in ancient Victorian times, including whipping parlors where you would be paid to be whipped, among other things. And so part of me wonders about that too, because I do think you've communicated in this book very, very well that as you were saying earlier, love is almost like a kind of force. Right. It is almost a extra temporal, extraterrestrial, almost like a Star Wars kind of force. Right. And I think that comes across just brilliantly in your rewrite. And then I was thinking about William Hope Hodgson and his life, because I'm fairly certain he was a lifelong bachelor. Right. Was he married ever? Do you know much about his life? Because
I think he was married. I used to know, because I studied a lot of this whenever I was doing the book. I have a real sense, and I have nothing to confirm this, that he was madly in love with somebody who died.
Oh.
And I think there was a lot to that. I believe he married again. I don't know how much he loved the woman he married, and again, that's just hints here and there from. I have a book that has some of his letters and such, and he's a Victorian. Who knows? What he's really thinking. He's not going to really put his emotions out there.
Yeah, in his letters. No, that's fascinating. I think Yeah, there's something to that. If I hopefully I'll end up writing one of the first ever uh, full articles about your rewrite of the Nightland for science fiction
Cool.
studies or something. So I'll have to look a
Mhm.
little bit more into Hodgson's life to sort of confirm some of these things. Um, because he was a really fascinating guy, right? Like
Mhm.
he was an early bodybuilder.
Yes.
He challenged Houdini to a contest to get out of uh, shackles of his own design, right?
Right. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. Yes, he did.
Yeah, and so it's just like, and apparently the crowd was like so big that they thought a riot was going to be started, and then Houdini eventually like ended up getting out, and they had to like usher Hodgson away because they were concerned for his safety. And it's
Mhm.
like, what an interesting guy. And then, he dies in World War I, you know,
Yes.
as a young man, right, in his 30s. So it's like,
Uh-huh.
yeah.